Hello and welcome to another episode of Half Court Press. He's Wilson Moore. I'm John Walker, and we're a couple of basketball boys.
We are.
It's the middle of February in, I don't know, a little more than 3 weeks. It'll be Selection Sunday, right?
Seriously?
Is it? I don't know. Maybe.
I mean, that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. A little more than 3
weeks.
weeks. It'll be Selection Sunday. There are 5 games left in the regular season for Creighton, and I'd assume somewhere right around there for Nebraska as well.
4, yeah.
4 left for Nebraska, 5 for Creighton. So, long story short, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty.
We are.
It's that time of year. We're going to talk about all of that over the next half hour or so. So thanks for joining us. Welcome if this is your first time joining us, and stick along for the ride.
Yeah.
Before we dive into all of that, what has been, I don't know, an eventful week for both Creighton and Nebraska.
Weird week.
A weird week, to say the least. An off week, importantly, for Creighton and for myself. We'll talk about all of that, but before we do, Wilson, how the heck are you, man?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, you had a pretty good couple of days. I thought I saw Adam Driver at my gym this morning, but
Every day I wake up.
it was
Marriage Story? Are you familiar?
No.
That's okay.
It was just a guy who looked like him. Adam Driver was not working out at the YMCA in Lincoln, Nebraska. I assume I didn't ask. I just used
Sure.
reasoning.
You know, why would Adam Driver be in Lincoln, Nebraska? Did you just dox yourself?
What?
Did you just dox yourself by exposing that you go to the Y? And
There are several in Lincoln.
okay,
So the the paparazzi still doesn't know which one I go
That's
to. I
good.
think there are like 5 in
okay.
Lincoln. So
Well, whichever one they go to, they'll see an Adam
a
Driver
guy who
lookalike.
looks like Adam Driver.
Yeah.
I really hope this guy listens to this podcast. He's like, wait, I live in Lincoln, and people tell me I look like Adam Driver.
It has been an interesting week for you.
Yeah.
With Nebraska. It's been an interesting week for me because Creighton hasn't had a game.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of hubbub was made about how much Creighton needed the bye week after I think it was 10 games in 32 days or whatever it ended up being, and that means I covered all of those.
Yeah.
And so I could have used the break as well.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to get a little reset before we really dive into the time of year that matters, really.
Yeah.
Like, they all matter, sure, but like nobody's talking about wins from November at this point.
No.
You know what I mean?
You know, UT Rio Grande Valley feels like a distant memory.
Who? No.
The Vaqueros.
We thought that was going to be, I think I said on here, like, there's no way that team finished. They were picked 8th in the Southland, I believe.
Yeah, have they? I have not paid any attention.
And they're like 8th in the Southland. But at the
they
time,
played so well against both teams in this state.
Yeah, at the
both
time,
of whom are probably going to make the tournament.
Yeah, we were like, okay, this team's pretty salty. Maybe not so much.
14-13, 6-10 in conference.
Oof.
Bunch of games against like non-D1s. Oh yeah, and they lost to Wisconsin, who might be the best team in the Big Ten, by 3.
It all went downhill from there.
It did.
Wilson, so let's start with Nebraska, because I guess they've played 2 games since the last time we recorded.
Since we last
Creighton
spoke,
only recorded the one, or only played the one since the last time we recorded, and the first one, a 68-64 win at Northwestern. Did not seem likely.
Super normal game. Nothing crazy happened
there. It's the type of game where it was in Nebraska's control the whole time, and nobody ever had to panic that they were going to fall out of the bubble or have their bubble burst. That's not what happened.
That was
because that was one of the weirder games of the season, Wilson.
It most definitely was. It feels like a long time ago. Now, just talking about it, was less than a week ago. Yeah. Look, this is the world we live in college basketball. But, yeah, I mean, Nebraska, look, I'll say this. Until 3 days later, that first half was Nebraska's worst half of the season. We can get to what happened after that, but Nebraska's worst half of the season. But the thing is, when you're playing a team that's having the kind of season Northwestern is, it's like if you're the worst team in that scenario, you got to outplay the superior team for 40 minutes, and Northwestern most definitely did not do that. Nebraska played a lot better in the second half. Northwestern played a lot worse in the second half. Turnovers and dumb fouls, and it just kind of snowballed on Northwestern. And the result was a win that Nebraska very badly needed, because Nebraska's at a point, and we'll get to this more when we talk about Penn State.
Sure.
But Nebraska's at a point where it has its resume wins. Creighton, UCLA, Illinois, Oregon, those are the tentpole wins in Nebraska's tournament resume.
That's holding up the resume.
Yeah, those are holding up the resume. So now at that point, Nebraska doesn't need some major resume defining win to make the tournament. They just got to stack wins. They just got to make the record better. Stay afloat in all the metrics. So in that regard, it was a big win for Nebraska, because they're at a point of the season where just every win counts. Yeah, every win gets you incrementally closer to March.
I think the important thing, too, is you said it's a win they badly needed. Yeah. It's a loss they couldn't afford.
Yeah.
They're kind of at that point. It's sure, we're playing to win, obviously, because every win helps you. I think they're back on the bubble, near the bubble.
Yeah,
after,
most things I've seen have had them in the last 4 buys range, which they kind of played themselves into the 8-9 line. They seem to be back on the 10 seed. Yeah.
But so for a team in that position, now you're talking about, okay, we can't lose. We can't lose. And obviously, so that's kind of another reason why all these games are super important. Badly needed win, can't afford loss. Little bit of each, because Northwestern probably wouldn't have burst the bubble, but what happened a couple days later, coupled with what could have been.
If they had gone 0-2 to 2 teams with a combined 8 conference wins, that's pull the fire alarm right there.
It would not have been good, because the Huskers hung on, or came back to win 68-64 at Northwestern. They were down 20 in that game early in the second half, and were able to claw their way back over the final 19 minutes. That's not what happened Wednesday at Penn State.
It did not. Nebraska just looked shell-shocked against Penn State. Nebraska looked overwhelmed by Penn State's full court press, trap at half court, random traps coming on ball handlers. Nebraska turned the ball over on 5 possessions in a row at one point, which does not seem possible, but it happened. I mean,
that's insane.
Yeah.
5 straight possessions that you just give away.
Yeah. And, Nebraska played them basically even in the second half. Andrew Morgan was Nebraska's best offensive player in the second half. Bryce Williams got his, but just the biggest issue, the turnovers early, and they couldn't get stops on defense. Ace Baldwin, I think the phrasing I used in my story was tore through Nebraska's defense like it was tissue paper. He was just beating dudes off the dribble, getting to the rim, kicking out to 3. Thank you. Isn't it tough? You use something and you're like, I used this and now I can't use it again. Anyway, he was, they couldn't stay in front of him. They couldn't really stay in front of anyone on the perimeter. Yeah. They gave up a lot of rebounds, but also part of it was just they missed a lot of shots, and Penn State wasn't missing a lot of shots. So there were a lot of rebounds out there for Penn State to get. It was just Nebraska's worst performance of the year by quite a bit, I think, because the other games that they had gotten blown out this year, Michigan State, Purdue, Wisconsin, those are 3 really good teams. Yeah. Those are 3 teams that will be 4 seeds at minimum in the tournament. To lose like that to Penn State, that hurts. And I said this to you before we started recording. And, you can look at the metrics of right now it's quad 2. If Penn State wins a few games, it'll be quad 1. But
it's up to a quad 1.
It is up to quad 1 now.
I believe it is up to quad 1. Penn State's 71st.
Okay, so
it's up to a quad 1 for the moment.
But
it'll teeter.
It'll teeter, and regardless of the quad, when you lose to a team that was 4-11 in conference play, that's a bad loss.
Yeah.
Like, there are no two ways around it, especially when you are, like we talked about with Northwestern, when you are in Nebraska's situation where you are, it's the last 5 games of the season and you are in a situation of like, okay, you just got to add wins, just stack those on top of each other and let your resume do the rest. Just take care of business. That hurts.
Yeah, it really does, because that ended up being a 17-point game, which in itself is like, oof.
Yeah.
They trailed by 20+ for a lot of that game.
Like,
they were down 26 at one point.
Yeah, and 17 points, like it wasn't even that close,
No.
At no point, at one very brief point, when Nebraska went on an 11-2 run early in the second half and cut it from 25 to 16. That was the one time it was brief. Like, are they gonna do this again? But it's just like you can't dig yourself into holes like that and keep coming back.
They were down 15 after the first 10 minutes.
Yeah,
they're down 23-8.
Yeah,
it's like if you have 5 turnovers.
Yeah,
on consecutive possessions.
Yeah.
In a game that you're trailing by 15.
Yeah,
it tells you those 5 turnovers might be the difference.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, it was just a weird week for them.
It was like this kind of fever dream of week. They didn't come.
That's probably the weirdest week of the season for them.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, like, they didn't come back to Nebraska between games. They went straight from Evanston to State College.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's odd.
It's odd. It was weird.
It hasn't been as odd of a week for Creighton because, again, they've only played one game. And they did not have to come back from 20. They did not trail by 20. But the interesting thing is the Jays, who rattled off 9 straight wins from, January 11th to, what was it? Yeah, January 11th to February 8th. So they rattled off 9 straight in a month, a part of that long stretch we were talking about. They've now lost back-to-back games. Those 9 straight turned the season around.
Yeah.
And they've lost back-to-back now.
It kind of feels like, like we're seeing the ceiling of Creighton. Like they won 9 straight, and then they got to like the big dogs,
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, this is where the run ends. Like, this is as good as you are, which isn't to like denigrate Creighton or say, they can't beat either of those teams in New York in a couple weeks, which I think they're more than capable of doing. But just it kind of felt like that was like that kind of drew a line in the sand of like, this is where Creighton is. This is where they compare to the best teams in the conference, which they went 1-2 against them. And
that's like,
so,
it's so odd because let's take, just for what this team has been in Big East play, let's take away all of the early season stuff, the loss to Nebraska, the rough week in Vegas, almost beat Bama, lost Pop. Like, let's throw all of that out the window for a second. In Big East play, this team got blown out at Georgetown for reasons that we'll talk about here shortly. And then they found their footing because they had a few days off. They beat Villanova at home. And then they had 10 days off over the holidays. And they beat St. John's by a point in Omaha. And it was like, okay, well, at that time we didn't know St. John's was as good as St. John's is as we know they are now. But we kind of knew St. John's was pretty good. I was like, okay, Creighton is going to hang with these teams once they find their footing. And then they go to Marquette and lose in a game that they let slip through their fingers. They could have beat Marquette in Milwaukee. And then they rattle off those 9 straight. And it's like, okay, this team has found its footing. They're going to be okay. And they were just gassed, against UConn, gassed against St. John's. But I think even if not gassed, like, you can't let a freshman walk into your gym and drop 38 points.
Yeah, inadvisable.
And Greg McDermott kind of, this was my story from Sunday's loss at St. John's. It's like Greg McDermott told us before they went to New York, okay, Creighton had to limit turnovers, had to rebound, and had to win the free throw battle. They didn't check any of those boxes, like not one. and they lost. I don't think it's a coincidence. The head coach literally laid out the game plan, and they didn't do any of those things. And it was like, okay, they've hung with these teams, but you have to beat them, like to win a Big East championship, to go to New York as the 1 seed, to do all of these things. And now, with 5 games left in the regular season, they don't control their own destiny. That was Greg McDermott's message ahead of that UConn game is, okay, well, with us having beat Marquette in the rematch and UConn coming up and St. John's coming up, like after that, our schedule's a lot easier. He didn't say that, but like their schedule's a lot easier. If we want to control our we control our destiny, everything we want is in front of us. And now they're going to need a little bit of help because they lost Sunday at St. John's, 79-73 in a game that the Jays probably could have won, I would say. I don't know if you watch it. No, because
when was that?
It was Sunday.
Okay, so that was while Nebraska was playing Northwestern.
Okay, so you were dealing with the Evanston debacle.
Yeah.
And then storm back, I guess.
Yeah.
Speaking of storm, I'm so sorry. St. John's was, I'd say, just the better team Sunday. Really. Yeah. Like, there was a lot of fuss made about the foul discrepancy. Creighton was called for 23 fouls. Its most since December 2020.
Wow.
Listeners of this podcast probably know, and if you don't, then I'm about to tell you that Creighton does not foul. That's like the defensive identity. They have a 7'1" rim protector. They're okay. Not like normally you foul because you just got beat off the dribble or whatever. They're okay not fouling because they know that they have one of the best rim protectors in the country hanging back there. A lot of Creighton's defense is focused around funneling guys into Ryan Kalkbrenner. Like, they're okay getting beat if it happens on the perimeter. And St. John's missed, St. John's missed 50 shots in that game. Nearly 50 shots in that game. They got 20 offensive rebounds. That'll make your defense scramble.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you're playing. Who you're playing. And then you couple that with the fact that St. John's applies rim pressure like few teams in the country do. And now you're talking about a team that, usually you'll grab an offensive rebound, you kick. There's your 3-point shot.
Yeah.
That's not what St. John's wants to do. They want to kick and drive. And so they shot 29 free throws. Creighton shot 15 of them. And Greg McDermott reiterated ahead of Friday's practice, like this Friday's practice today, we're recording on Friday, that we were a little bit too handsy. We got off of our spots. We let guys get by us, and we fouled. But otherwise, it was interesting because Creighton had its chances, especially down the stretch. Like, I said St. John's was the better team. Sure, eventually late. But this was like the fist fight we thought it'd be, the fist fight it was advertised as.
Would you say?
I would say, Wilson, that it was a mud fight.
We need like a mud fight counter on here.
We need like T-shirts, like mud fight T-shirts. We just bring buckets of mud in here, slop them around. I don't know.
Doesn't that sound like something that you would hear about like a quirky coach doing as like a motivational tactic?
Like elbow dropping a trash can or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like that sounds like something like a mid-major coach would do. Anyway, we went on a little tangent there.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But Creighton had its chances. There are like absolutely no doubts about that. I probably won't dive too much into this because everyone probably already knows. Even with Ryan Kalkbrenner off the floor.
Yeah.
He went down, got tangled up, hit the deck, grabbed his right foot, said some expletives. It was very visible on TV, the words coming out of his mouth, or one word repeatedly. And he left for 6 minutes. Looked like a pretty serious injury. He came back, played the final 3:47.
What is it about Creighton and these injuries that look like season-ending in the moment?
We've had two now. Stephen Ashworth's ankle against Nebraska. That looked really serious at the time.
He looked like he was in some pain.
Yeah. And then and then Ryan Kalkbrenner, obviously against St. John's. Thankfully for Creighton, they're both fine, because I couldn't tell you what Creighton's season would be without one of those guys, let alone without both of them. It certainly wouldn't be what it is now. But they don't have to worry about that, because Kalk's back like he never left. Greg McDermott said ahead of Friday's practice he's fine. He'll play against Georgetown. We'll talk about that. But, yeah, it was just a big squandered opportunity, really. Creighton had got through that 9-game win streak doing the little things correctly. They had defended like their lives depended on it. They had rebounded. They had cut down the turnovers. And they didn't do that against UConn, and they didn't do that against St. John's. And then the last, and I would think most important thing, is Creighton was so good down the stretch and had so many things go right at the end of those 9 games. For example, Stephen Ashworth's bank shot at Villanova. And they just didn't have that late game onus that against St. John's or UConn that they did in those previous 9 games. And so here the Jays are with 5 games left, and they sit 2 games behind. Yeah, 2 games behind St. John's, and they're going to need some help to get a Big East championship that seemed was within reach Sunday at St. John's, and slipped a little bit further away with that loss.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
We will.
St. John's still has to play Marquette and UConn. And Creighton's toughest game is at Xavier, which
it feels
will be
like
tough. But
it feels like the Big East revolves around how you do against Marquette, UConn, St. John's, Creighton.
Yep.
Welcome
to the Big East.
Yeah.
That's been it for the past few years. I don't really Ed Cooley's making a little bit of noise in the nation's capital, but I don't see any reason why that's going to change next year or in the near future.
Yeah.
As long as Pitino stays at St. John's, and I don't see anything really changing with Marquette, Creighton, UConn.
Yeah.
If Dan Hurley didn't leave for the Lakers, you know what I mean? Why is he going to leave for, I don't know, unless the Knicks come calling, because Tibbs wore down his players or whatever. I don't know. But, no, that's
I don't think players would be any less worn down playing for Dan Hurley versus Tibbs.
Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Sure. But hey, man, it works. It works.